if it wasn't good, and so it must be good, right? It's this implied endorsement. And so if more doctors recommend it, then it's got to be great. But the reality is that most people don't understand is that this is a piece of faux science because Tylenol is just in more hospitals than any other painkiller. Right? And so it's in more hospitals than any other painkiller. And we have no idea what kind of samples or free goodies, free bottles, free pills that Tylenol gives to doctors. See, this is the kind of thing that Tylenol engineered this, right? Tylenol engineered this. Just because more doctors recommend it doesn't mean anything. It just means that Tylenol, in this case, I know that it just means that Tylenol is in more hospitals, more medical facilities than any other brand. It just means that Tylenol is better at marketing their brand to doctors and getting doctors, whether it be incentivizing doctors or not, to recommend their brand. That's all this tells us, right? Is that Tylenol has done a better job of getting their brand, getting their product into doctors' hands than the other brands. This doesn't necessarily tell us that Tylenol is better, that it's safer, that it's more effective, but it certainly has that implication. And then the last one, motorcycle accidents accounted for less than 1/10 the fatalities of automobile accidents. This is a piece of faux science because on the surface, it conveys that motorcycles are safer than automobiles. It conveys that your likelihood of getting into an accident and dying on a motorcycle is far less than in an automobile, right? That's what this on the surface conveys. But what's not being shared in here is that there are far less motorcycles on the road, than there are automobiles. And so if we looked at what percentage of motorcyclists get into accidents compared to what percentage of automobile drivers get into accidents, we might find that it's significantly higher. A significantly higher percentage of motorcyclists get into accidents and die compared to automobile drivers. Or we might find that the percentage of fatalities from accidents of motorcyclists is significantly higher than fatalities from people in accidents in automobiles. For example, just giving you a number, for instance, we could find that, 1 out of 3 motorcyclists that's in an accident, that are in an accident, die, whereas maybe 1 in 49 people that get into an automobile accident die. This is an example, as you're going to see later on, as you're going to learn more about later on, not only of faux science, but it is a different frame. It's reframing it, right? Because the way we're saying it here, because of the way we're conveying the statistic, right? It seems on the surface like what we're talking about is motorcycles are safer than automobiles because motorcycle accidents accounted for less than 1/10 the fatalities of automobile accidents, meaning that automobile accidents cause 10 times the amount of fatalities. But like I said, maybe there were 20 times, 30 times, 40 times, 50 times the amount of automobile accidents. This conveys the idea that motorcycles are safer when really a different message would convey the complete opposite. And so that is an example of faux science. And so if I was selling motorcycles or something that had to do with a motorcycle event or a motorcycle getaway or a trip for motorcyclists or something for individuals that are thinking about buying a motorcycle but are kind of a little bit all over the place, this is a great piece of faux science to use, right? And what coming up with this, it requires that you dig. It requires that you look for, and you're going to learn this later on, it requires that you understand the frame that you want to convey, right? And then it's all about how you couch and present the data. Because I hate to say it, but this is the reality, that data can be presented to show almost anything that you want. And I don't mean lying. I don't mean making up data. I mean taking the data as it is, the truth. Like I actually looked up these stats. I looked up these numbers, and it was something like, I forget, like 440,000 deaths from automobile accidents in 2011 and 4,400 deaths from motorcycles, something like that, right? And so it was 1/10, right? But I knew that if I looked at the other number, right, I could present an altogether different number and I could show the complete opposite. And so that is why we call this faux science. The next trigger, number 7, is what we call the identity molding tactic. And this is really all about, how do you want prospects to view themselves before they consume your marketing message, right before they're buying, and then after they buy, right? And so this is before they're consuming your marketing message. So let's say you're sending out an email that's bringing somebody to a VSL or is bringing somebody to a long form sales letter. And so this is about how do you want them to view themselves, right, before they go to your marketing. So how do you want them to view themselves before they click that link, right? And then how do you want them to view themselves right before they buy? Right? And then how do you want them to view themselves after? This is about you molding how they view themselves. And so let's look at before consumption of marketing just for a second, right? And so this is how do you want the prospect to see themselves before your marketing content? And like I said, before the purchase, how do you want your prospect to see themselves before buying your product or service? And then post-sale, and this is in your customer follow-up sequence, how do you want the prospect to see themselves as the owner of your product or service, right? And so you don't let this happen naturally. You don't let this happen passively. This is what you mold this. So for example, let's say we were selling a product on how to lose weight, right? Or how to get into shape. And so after they purchase, we want them to begin seeing themselves as a fitness person, right? As a person that's an exerciser, right? In other words, when somebody buys a gym membership, you don't wait for them to go to the gym multiple times over the course of multiple weeks and multiple months before you, as the staff at that facility, begin referring to them and seeing themselves as an exerciser. No, you begin referring to them as an exerciser, as a successful exerciser, as somebody who is on the path now to getting into the best shape of their life, somebody who is on the path to reaping the rewards of a healthy, fitness-oriented lifestyle. That's how we want them to see themselves. But early on in the process, that's not how we want them to see themselves. Right? So before they go to your sales letter, we don't want them to see themselves that way. We want them to see themselves that way after. Early on, we want them to see themselves potentially as spiraling out of control, as somebody who doesn't have a handle on their health, as somebody who's setting themselves up for health, wellness, issues, as somebody who's setting themselves up for ailments, for conditions, somebody who's not taking care of themselves, somebody who's letting themselves go. And then right before the purchase, we want them to see themselves as somebody who is aware of their situation, who's aware of their health, and who's ready to take the necessary action. A person who understands the value of health, who understands the value of fitness, who understands the value of doing something for themselves and taking care of themselves. And so you see how we're molding their identity at different stages of our marketing. And so in the email, just like I said, again, look, the clearest difference is post-purchase. Post-purchase, now it's congratulations, welcome to the club. Now you're part of the successful clan. Now you're on your way. Now you're an exerciser. Now you're taking care of yourself. This is day one. Right? They join the fitness facility day one. That's how you're referring to them. Way to go, right? Because they're on that path. That's not how we want them to see themselves here. We don't want them to feel the positive associations, the positive feelings with before they buy. And we certainly don't want them, to feel that way over here. We want, right, we want to show them the misery. Then we want to show them that they're there. They get it. They understand it. They value it. They're right on that. They're right about to take the step that they know is what they should do. The step that they know is what's right for their health. And now, congratulations, way to go. You're an exerciser. You're on your way. You're taking care of your health. You're one of the health conscious people. Way to go, right? And so, very profound when you get that. Something else that I'll share with you that I want you to write down and I want you to file away, because it's really something to keep in the forefront of your mind, especially as it relates to identity molding, but really in marketing in general when you are dealing with prospects. And I want to talk about the idea of feelings, right? We talk about how, when it comes to marketing and it comes to selling, that it's all about emotion, right? That people buy out of emotion. They buy for emotional reasons. And then later on, they justify that decision with logic. They rationalize that decision with logic. That's why, just as a side note, anytime you marketing, selling anything to somebody, when they buy, you need to provide them with the logical reasons why they made a wise decision. Because what happens is when marketers only sell on emotion and don't give any rational or logical justification for somebody purchasing, what happens is, when the emotional stimulation wears off, as it does oftentimes within hours, literally within hours, what happens is buyer's remorse sets in when they cannot logically justify to themselves or a spouse or a partner why the decision was wise, right? When somebody buys something out of emotion, they then have to go home, if they're married, for example, and give their spouse the logical justification for the purchase. They're not going to get the spouse emotional, because that's what your marketing did with them. They're now going to convey the rational, logical reasons why they needed to buy this product or service, why they needed it. And so you always need to provide the logical reasoning for people, in addition to getting them emotional about the benefits, the results, the solution, the alleviation of a problem, pain, etc. The thing that I want you to grasp is that what drives people are feelings. And so, for example, this idea of, fear of failure. You oftentimes hear marketers talk about, that prospects are afraid of failing. Well, prospects are not afraid of failing. Listen to me. There is no such thing as the fear of failure. What there is the fear of feeling like a failure. The fear of feeling like a failure, right? And so it's different from thinking that prospects are afraid to fail. It's not that they're afraid to fail. It's that they don't want to feel like a failure again. They don't want to feel like a failure. They don't want to feel like a loser. They don't want to feel like an outcast. They don't want to feel a certain way. And so you need to remember that, because marketing is a process of conveying feelings. I think it was Zig Ziglar, or maybe it was Dan Kennedy who said that it's this conveyance, this transference of feelings. Right? And so this is all about, we're stimulating feelings here. We're getting them to see themselves a certain way because of how it makes them feel. And so you start by understanding, how do you want them to feel about themselves in their current situation? Because that will dictate how we want them to see themselves. Because we know that it's this painting of this picture of how we get them to see themselves that elicits certain feelings, the feelings that they don't want. Over here, it's the same thing. It's the same thing the whole way through, right? We want them to feel like a success. We want them to feel like they're doing something good. We want them to feel like they are on their way. We want them to feel like they're part of the club. It's not that they want to be part of the club. It's that they want to feel like they're part of the club. And that's a nuance, but it is huge. And so that is identity molding. Number 8 is the steering choice tactic. And this is really where we give prospects the illusion of choice, but we're not giving them a real choice. We're strategically presenting their choices in a certain way. And we're strategically presenting their choices, their options, if you will, so that it leads to seeing our product, our service as the best. And so the key word here is that we are strategically laying out the prospect's choices. Now, let me give you a little context to how this works and why this is so insanely powerful. This is insanely powerful because typically the average marketer, the average salesperson doesn't talk about choices, right? They typically only talk about their product. They only talk about their product as being the best, positive. They don't talk about any other options. Well, when you talk about other options besides your product or service, it causes prospects psychologically to put their guard down, to drop their filter. It causes them to see you in a different light, not as the typical marketer, as the typical salesperson, right? And you're going to see throughout a bunch of these triggers, especially later on, that one of the things that we do or that we attempt to do with certain triggers